we'll have a short question and answer session now. So any questions that may have arisen earlier, where people had questions as what's going to be happening and when is it happening, these are the people who are going to be able to advise us there. So thank you. So who have we got?
Hi, my name's Niall Hogarth. I'm from the Lake Hotel in Killarney. We were flooded in 2009. We had a lot of damage. We were also flooded in 2015. I'd hope, I'm up here nearly begging Mark if he could please include us in CFRAMS. I don't know who's responsible, but somebody's forgotten about us. We had 1.6 million worth of damage to our business. We have no insurance. We employ 120 people. Our family are in the hotel industry over 100 years. Our hotel is there for 200 years. It was never a floodplain until 2009. The flood in 2015 was 13 inches higher. And the big concern I have at the moment, presently in Killarney, the lakes are flooding. They're clearing the Flesk, which fills the lake, but there's no work being done to the Lown. Now, I spent all this summer, I bought a drone. I've spent all this summer walking the riverbanks and trying to gather information on how we can do this. There's oak trees down in the Lown River. There's one particular oak tree, it's about 50 foot. If the next flood takes it, it'll get stuck in Beaufort Bridge. And we had a river in Killarney, the Gadock was actually washed away there a few years ago, cost the council millions to repair it. So our concern is if another flood comes, or they do work somewhere else, it's going to have an effect on us. Now,
sorry, obviously this is a very particular issue, so I wonder if we can ask the question.
Cards, Mark? Yeah. Can we swap cards? And I don't want to be negative here. This is a fantastic.
No, but this is the forum where we can identify what the issues are. But really, I think for the questions, it's for you to say you want to talk to the.
Sorry, but our big issue is that they're clearing the rivers that fill the lake, but they're not doing anything to the rivers that drain the lake. So if you could look into it, I've tried everything in Kerry. I've been to all your meetings. I've been to everything. I've said I drove up from Kerry up here today. Look, this is a very good meeting. I don't want to be negative. It's absolutely fantastic.
No, but this is
and I feel something will be done. If I could just swap cards maybe with Mark and actually Cyril, I have a few questions for you as well, because we actually put a mound around our business. It's about maybe 4 feet high, and we've grown grass in it, but we have none of those poles. How quick do you think the seepage would come up? We did put sumps in place. Do you think that?
You'd need a feel for the geology, really. You might want to dig a trial pit and see if you've got good clay overburden. If you've got gravel, you'd want to consider seepage. It might depend how long the water's up.
Yeah, we've got gravel. It's usually only up for 3 or 4 days.
I suppose really the question here is for the OPW. When people have serious issues like this and they go round and round and round, where is the place they can go? And I suppose that's really one of the main things that the National Flood Forum can do, is be that voice and be that place to be able to say, well, actually, this is how the system works, because it's very frustrating and very distressing for people who really are willing to do work themselves but don't know where to go. So what is it that should and could be done?
Yeah, no, certainly we'll have a chat directly afterwards. That's not a problem at all. Just one thing you mentioned that I just want to pick up on, that you said it was never a floodplain in the past. It was just by chance that it didn't flood. I think that's important to note. I mean, the floods of 2009 and 2015-16 have both been absolutely exceptional in terms of the magnitude. They're both very, very severe, rare events, but they've highlighted a problem that was always there. It's just by chance that it hadn't happened until that time. But the overall point, I suppose, is that if you're not covered under the CFRAM programme, what happens? As I said, it wouldn't have been possible for us to have identified and tried to address every single problem around the country in one programme. It just simply wouldn't have been possible. We had to focus it, and we focused it on those communities at potentially significant flood risk, as we understood them through the preliminary flood risk assessment. We identified 300. Going through the detailed assessment, as I said in the presentation, there are a number of them actually which weren't, where the level of community flood risk isn't as great as we'd thought. So it was quite inclusive, but it was focused on communities, on villages, towns, cities. And in the next step, we'll need to be looking to see, well, how can we better understand the rural risk? That will be a process, and it will take time. In the interim, I would say the first point of contact, if you have a flood problem, would be the local authority. As I said, we have the minor works scheme that's been running since 2009. An application for funding under the minor works scheme needs to come from the local authority. So if you have a local problem that isn't being identified or addressed through the CFRAM programme, I would say the first point of contact should be the local authority to see can they address it themselves straight away. If not, then can they make an application to the OPW under the minor works scheme?
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question at the back.
Porrick Joyce here, Regional Chairman of IFA. The question I have for you is, you just showed a slide there of Clonmel and the good work that you had done there with the barrier along the side. But on the opposite side of that barrier, did you not notice the tree growing into the river? And if that tree is left there and no maintenance programme, I mean, those barriers won't even work in it, give it 10 years. And what happened, we'll say, I know it's away from here in Carndunna, local authorities told us the trees came down the river and they brought the bridges with them. So what I'm saying is there's a need for a maintenance programme along with those barriers going up.
Just in terms of Clonmel, there is a fairly tight maintenance regime there because it's a flood relief scheme and it's maintained by the OPW in partnership with Tipperary County Council. So in that regard, I mean, we don't want to go into cutting every tree down either.
Well, if you just look at the slide again, if you look at the slide again there, the tree is growing down into the river. So, I mean, that's going to cause a problem down the road.
There is in programme some tree removal for next spring, so I presume it'll be addressed then.
We have another question here at the back.
Can I just maybe...
Sorry, Mark.
We've got a presentation later on this afternoon from John Joe, who I spoke to at this event last year. They've brought forward from a community basis, a community-led project to look at maintaining a stretch of channel. So again, I think we'll hear more about how.
So we've got a few more presentations coming up, and you'll see a bit more from the community perspective how, and in fact with Laois is a very good example of how Laois Community Group have worked in tandem with all the agencies and with the department. So we have one more question.
Yeah, one question. Thanks, Mark, for the presentation. I met you here last year as well. David Murray from the South Galway Flood Relief Committee. We've done a lot of research as part of the flooding impacts in South Galway, and we've been hit several times over the last 2 decades with flooding. So when it came to the CFRAMs, I think there was one very important point missed. And I see that reflected a lot in the way things are planned close to flood-affected areas. Is there
a question?
Yes,
you just asked the question. Yeah, briefly.
So the question. I just want to outline the situation first. So what happens is the person beside me here was in a village where maybe 3 houses were flooded. So he missed the CFRAMs. But when you look at a catchment basis, over 30 houses were flooded in that catchment, and yet when it came to the first CFRAMs, we didn't even appear on the map. We don't appear on that particular map. Also, where it comes to engagement with forestry or with wind farms, there's nobody that has a catchment perspective. They all do environmental impact assessments just on their little piece of development. They don't take in the whole catchment. Forestry will be piece by piece, whereas the whole catchment view is not taken into account. So when are we going to see more of catchment analysis here? Yeah, no, I would take on board your point completely. I mean, if we have 30 properties distributed around the country, that wouldn't have been the focus of the CFRAM. It was focused on the concentrations of risk, as it were. I mentioned in the presentation working with the EPA, working with the Department of Housing, Planning, Local Governments, and there's other agencies and departments involved in the discussions, looking to see what can be developed in terms of integrated catchment management. I mentioned the Water Framework Directive. Through that process, they're looking to address water quality issues, but quite a lot of those issues arise because of runoff. So there's work that can be done that can help improve water quality, but equally can help reduce flooding at a catchment level. So we are liaising with the EPA and the department and others, looking to see how
the work or the programs that they're now kicking off can be developed to take into account other aspects such as flood risk. They have what's called LAWCO, it's the Local Authority Water Community Officers. They have people then on the ground who will be looking at catchment-specific or very local-specific issues within the catchment context. And we're looking to see how, as they go through that work, they can be looking at flood risk issues as well as just purely focusing on water quality. So I would say, yes, it's not an area that we've developed well to date, but it is an area we're conscious of and that we want to make improvements of going into the future.
Yeah, thanks.
So I've got a few more questions. We just take maybe two. I know there's a lot of hands up, but if we can just briefly.
Thanks very much. Councillor John Napton, Roscommon County Council. Just a quick question on the CFRAM study, Mark, and it has done a lot of work for the urban areas, identifying the problems that are there and how they're going to be addressed. But there's a lot of concern in rural communities that they are going to be left with an additional impact with very little progress on what's going to be done to address the situation there. And you're on about carrying out further works and further studies on for the rural areas, and that could be a long way down the road, and these people will be left without any security. A lot of concerns, particularly on what happened in 2009 and 2015, and concerns that we could be looking at this over what was identified maybe as a 1 in 100-year flood happening every 5 or 10 years, and the impact on them on an individual basis is very significant, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed urgently at a national level. And just one more thing in relation to the hotel, and you identified the small work schemes that can be put through the council. But to qualify for that, you have to meet cost-benefit analysis on what the outcome of those works. So for a hotel, unless it's seen that there's a benefit there, a greater benefit than the cost of the works, these works mightn't be carried out. And that's a significant concern for a lot of where there might be 2 or 3 houses in an area and they're not meeting the cost-benefit analysis and they're left on their own to address the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Just in terms of one comment about sort of impacts of the CFRAM, and one thing that we have been and will continue to be very vigilant about is to make sure that what we do doesn't increase flood risk elsewhere. It's something that's always looked at in relation to flood relief schemes. For areas that aren't captured under the CFRAM, and I've set out what we're focused on and why, the minor works scheme is there, but it's very important to recognise that is, although it's minor works, it's not a big flood relief scheme, it's still public money. And the public, I think, quite rightly would expect that they are going to get, I suppose, value for money in terms of the benefits of that investment have to be greater than the cost. That's something that applies across the board, and it applies to the minor works as well as the major flood relief scheme. So yes, there is a cost-benefit requirement there. The criteria for the minor works scheme have recently been reviewed. But there's still an across-the-board requirement that we get investment benefit for the investments made. I think we should also remember that flood protection, be it through a flood relief scheme or be it through a minor works investment, isn't the only solution. There are other ways of reducing the risk, as well as just putting in something to try and prevent the flood from coming in. And again, I come back to some of the non-structural measures that I mentioned in the presentation, particularly, for example, individual property protection. Is there something that can be done that while the grounds of the hotel or somewhere may become inundated, can we at least try and prevent that from coming into the property to reduce the damages there? So there are other things that can be done, even if a capital flood protection scheme or minor work isn't viable.
Okay, thanks very much. We have a question here. I hope it's a short question.
Very, very short question. Rory O'Connor, enjoyed the 2 presentations very much. I just wanted to ask specifically about catchment management approaches. This notion of integrated catchment management and natural flood mitigation measures. I think what Cyril in particular outlined was all hard engineering solutions. Has the OPW got ideas around more natural measures, especially in upland areas and the top end of catchments? And have they got the staff, the experience, the expertise, and if not, who are they engaging with?
It's not an area we've done a lot of work in, I have to say. We are actively engaged with a number of initiatives and groups who are looking to develop sort of integrated catchments approaches, developing pilot natural flood management measures to see how we can develop and gain that experience. We have done a bit of work looking at, I suppose, experience from overseas. You know, what are the lessons learned? There have been quite a few pilot applications of the natural flood management measure around Europe, and there was a major European project which collated all that information. It's available on the website now. Natural water retention measures, or nwrm.eu. There's a huge amount of information there. The experience shows that this type of measure can help reduce flooding. In particular circumstances, it's not applicable everywhere. The degree to which it can reduce flood risk often mightn't be enough in its own right to prevent an area from flooding. It can slightly reduce the risk, but it may be part of the solution rather than the solution. There is an issue that when we're looking at the more extreme events, typically the catchments are saturated, so the benefits of this type of measure may reduce. And there's also an issue about landowner engagement, because typically the way natural flood risk management measures work, or some of them, would involve flooding upland areas to prevent flooding downstream. So we need to we would need to get significant stakeholder engagement and landowner engagement and agreement to this type of measure for it to actually be applied. Kirsty, I think. Sorry, I was just going to say, Kirsty, I think has just left, which is a terrible shame, because I know SEPA and the Scottish Government have done quite a lot of work in this area. Mm-hmm.
But that might be a subject that we take up again. I mean, I think really, as I said earlier, we're not going to get to discuss everything and get into the depth that we need to. I think, you know, for us today to try and identify where are the issues people have concerns, what are the things that could and should be done, and, you know, what's being done is not laid out, but then there are other areas obviously still under investigation. I can only really take one more question because we're really running out of time. Sorry, somebody at the back who's been waiting for some time.
Yeah, Eugene Murphy, TD. I'm the Fianna Fáil spokesperson on OPW and flood relief, and I will keep it brief because I know
have you a question for the OPW?
So what I want to say is it's important the forum continues, because I think it is a real important voice. Mm-hmm. But I just want to pose one question. There's great work going on, and I want to pay a compliment to the present minister and the former minister for what they're trying to do, and the agencies. But the reality is the pattern of rainfall has changed. I'll give you two very brief examples.
Yeah, sorry, can I just say we really need a question, because...
Well, this is unfortunate. This happened to me at the conference last year, and I hold an important role. Just give me 2 minutes, please. Yeah. And I'm slightly inconvenienced because I'm recovering from surgery here, so I can't stand up.
Yeah, no, you're fine. It's just that, yeah, go ahead.
So,
question.
In June 2016, there was a serious rainfall in my own area down near Strokestown and Roscommon, caused havoc in houses where there was never flooding. Mm-hmm. The total average rainfall for the month of June, 67 or 70% of that rainfall fell in the 2 hours. Mm-hmm. Having visited Inishowen, the total 66% of the average rainfall fell in 2 hours in Inishowen. Mm-hmm. Now, you look at Mount Mellick, the goalposts have changed, and we need to change as well in terms of how we deal with flash flooding. And finally, John Nocton has raised a very important point. We are all in favour of what's happening and the good work that's happening, but the water is going to be pushed out to other areas. It's not been solved, it's been pushed out, and we have to address that. Thank you.
Thank you. One last, because literally we want to get on to the positive stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Brian Kenny, from a civil engineer, chartered engineer with the Chamber of Commerce in Carrick-on-Shannon. And I suppose everything that was said here today I could agree with. But I suppose my question really is, why are we looking at protection measures when we should be looking at much cheaper prevention measures? And I suppose... I understand Mark's and Cyril's position in relation to the country at large, and I suppose I'm interested mainly in the Shannon catchment, and I understand a wee bit about it. But when the ESB controlled the water, and the OPW is given primary responsibility for flooding and flood risk management, how come we have one outfit in charge of the water and another outfit in charge of the consequences of that water being in the wrong place? That's,
I suppose, I think what we need to, like, obviously, that's the OPW are doing their job, so they can't answer, presumably, for the ESB.
No,
so
that's fair enough. The other point I would make, really, is in relation to Carrick and Shannon, and essentially, the Shannon is a man-made system. It's not really a river. And in fact, it's divided into 3 separate rivers as you go down the river. Athlone has its own problems with the discharge potential downstream, and the Minister, in fairness to him, is addressing that. But he seems to be addressing it outside of the CFRAMS process. CFRAMS has looked at communities at risk, and that's fair enough, but it's very, very limited. And where the main work should be done, and should be concentrated on, is the storage capacity in the system as it is, plus the conveyance capacity improvements that are needed after years and years of neglect. And that's where you get your bang for your buck.
So
in our particular
situation, is your question for the OPW?
The question I have for the OPW is, right now, at the moment, we have approximately 36 million cubic metres of storage in Loughallen, when we could have 67 million cubic metres of storage in Loughallen. And there is absolutely no reason, it would cost absolutely nothing to create that storage and save Carrick and Shannon in the event of a flood event similar to 2015-2016. We're quite convinced.
Do the OPW have an answer to that then, or is that your remit?
The OPW convene the committee that is responsible for coordinating the likes of the ESB and Waterways Ireland. And really, I believe that this is the cheapest, most effective solution at the moment. And we accept that all the other measures are going to take a couple of years to implement. But right now, the businesses in Carrick and Shannon are looking at potential flooding in the next 5-6 weeks. And when we have flooding in Carrick and Shannon, last time we had it for 8 weeks.
So do we want to get, can we ask for a response? Because literally we need to move on to the next section of the agenda. Thank you.
I've explained previously, the CFRAM was looking at the AFAs and it was focused on that. Carrick and Shannon was one of them. There's a potentially viable scheme. We'll need to obviously engage with the community about how that can move forward. As part of the CFRAM, and so I'll be quick as I can, as part of the CFRAM we did also look at the Callows, the Shannon the Callows particularly, but also the Shannon overall. And we ran a number of different options through the models to see what could help reduce the flooding. Storage in the locks was one of those. And we found that because of the sheer size and volume of water that's coming down the Shannon, while storage in the locks or indeed in the cutover bogs, it would slightly offset the onset of flooding, but it wouldn't necessarily actually reduce the peak level of flooding. There's so much water that comes down the Shannon and it lasts for so long that it would fill up the storage and then the water still has to go somewhere. So we did look at that. We found that it wasn't the solution, but the Shannon Coordination Group has been set up and we have been working with the ESB, with Waterways Islands. Last winter, the levels in Loughallen were dropped and they were kept lower than they have been in the past. But obviously that can be reviewed and looked at on an ongoing basis.
So I think we'll finish the questions there. I know people would like to take time and have more questions, and I know from the OPW we really appreciate them taking their time today because it's not a normal work day. But I think, these are the sort of things that maybe, this highlights that, people have questions. The OPW are more than willing to answer. And, we need probably to have more dialogue, and that's something, I suppose, within the forum, that the forum can be a place for people to bring those questions, and where people have individual issues that aren't being resolved, who are the people we should be dealing with. So really appreciate both Mark and Cyril giving their time and giving their, their expertise here today.